In this slideshow, I'm going to talk about the two key modes of production in television, as well as an emergent kind of in-between third mode. And the pictures I'm going to show you are all from comedies because I don't want you to get the sense that, well, one mode is specific for dramas and another for comedy. That's not the case. It really is about those aesthetic standards and the economics of what you're producing. Okay, the single camera mode comes from cinema, the history of movie making. And so the various decisions that you're making and the way that you approach telling your story is what's emerged from 100 years of Hollywood filmmaking. Okay, and that means that when you go and you shoot, you're shooting in the scenes in the most cost-effective order. If you have one location that appears at the very beginning of your episode and also the very end, you shoot them the same day. You shoot them at the same time because it's really expensive to go to different places and set everything up again. Okay, this is really key to the single camera mode. You're deciding where to place the camera every single time you shoot a program and a scene, and it costs money and time to do that, so you need to minimize it as best you can. Also, though, that means you have greater control over image and editing because you are choosing exactly where you want to put something every single time. Single camera is the mode that's traditionally used in primetime dramas, as well as many comedies, and also things like music videos and commercials, where you have a lot of money and time to do something that's fairly short. So you really want to think about having a unique visual style. The way that the single camera mode is using the master scene technique. So master scene is an approach to shooting that means that at the end of the day, you're going to have enough material that you can go and you can do your continuity editing and it all makes sense. But basically, if you have a scene, you shoot a master long shot of the entire scene. Everybody goes through all their lines, and then you move the camera and you shoot a medium shot going through the entire scene. And then you move it again and do another medium shot all the way through the scene. And then you move it again and you do close-ups. And even your close-ups, you go through the entire scene. And then at the end, you let the editor and post-production put it all together. So the thing is, with the master scene technique, what's sometimes called coverage, Hollywood coverage, you generate a whole lot of extra footage that you're never going to use. But the reason you do that is because that footage is relatively cheap compared to the time it takes you to set everything up for those shots. You might as well, once you've got your camera and your lights and all your blocking fixed, go through the entire scene so that when you're in editing, you have a lot more choices with what it is you want to put together. Okay, so again, single camera gives us a lot of control over what we're going to see, but it's really time consuming in that way. The second mode is multi-camera, which is exactly what it sounds like. You've got two or more cameras shooting at the same time, usually 3 cameras, sometimes 4 cameras, depending on the program. And in this case, editing is actually taking place while you're shooting a scene. It's usually done by a director who's in a different room looking at a series of monitors and cutting from one camera to another. Multi-camera is used in many sitcoms as well as soap operas, those daytime dramas, as well as game shows and sports and news. The reason being, with these kinds of programs, you're not trying to come up with a new way to see it every single time, or you want to be able to produce a lot of episodes easily. So soap operas, daytime dramas, their key difference with nighttime dramas or primetime dramas is they're on every single day of the week. So you've got to be able to produce them quickly. Same with game shows, right? You need to be able to do the same thing over and over with minimal inventing each time. Sitcoms are a little more interesting when it comes to the question of what it is you're going to choose. But one thing that multi-camera allows is for us to get people's reactions as it's being shot so we don't miss it, right? If you can imagine you're going to tell a joke, if you're doing it in single camera, you're going to run through that thing over and over and over and over again. People's reactions are not going to be that great every single time. Multi-camera allows you to get it just one time. So in general, multi-camera is less expensive and faster to produce than single camera, but not always. Now I'm going to go through a little helpful table here for you to see the differences at the different stages of production: pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production being everything before you start shooting, production the actual shooting, post-production what happens after shooting. So in the single camera mode, during pre-production, you spend a lot of time planning what your images are going to look like, because you're planning out all those shots. You're doing a lot of storyboarding, figuring out how we're going to see events unfold. When you're actually shooting, that is during production, you do it out of order. You do it in the most cost-effective manner. And then in post-production, you're going to unify, you're going to put it in sequence, so now it all makes sense. In multi-camera pre-production, you don't have to worry about that planning of images. Instead, you emphasize dialogue and refining the script. You have more time to rehearse because of that, and that's another reason why sitcoms often use the multi-camera mode. Where there's an emphasis on dialogue and people talking, you want to be able to rehearse that, and you want to be sure your script is really tight and funny. In production, the multi-camera mode is going to be shot live, and the scenes are going to be performed in order. Key reason being, you usually have an audience, and an audience is not going to make any sense if things aren't in order. But even more so, the fact that it's multi-camera, it's in a studio, there's no reason to not shoot it in order, because you're not going to different locations. You don't have to worry about minimizing costs that way. Finally, in post-production, you may have very little editing that you actually do. You may be very minimal because of the switching that takes place while you're shooting. Usually, there's some little scenes that you're going to go back in and cut in a little bit, a beat maybe into a scene. In some cases, there is major editing that takes place. Not everything is done through switching, but in general, that's the way it's done. Now, I am going to introduce to you a hybrid mode that's not nearly as common as the single camera and multi-camera, but has increased in popularity in the last 15 years or so because of the success of programs like The Office and also Parks and Recreation and a lot of other cheaply, quickly produced shows that have been on cable like MTV. So the thing with the hybrid mode, which I call Verite, is that it mimics the observational documentary, which uses handheld cameras and records lots and lots of footage. So the Verite mode in television, you're going to have multiple cameras shooting everything at the same time. That's going to generate a lot of footage, and then you're going to spend a lot of time in editing, putting together the best parts of it, right? So you can see how this kind of allows us to have that ability to simultaneously catch comic reactions when some line is told, as well as have a unique look because we can control it through the handheld camera. Examples of this approach, besides The Office, which I mentioned, are Curb Your Enthusiasm and Arrested Development. Curb Your Enthusiasm is an especially good example because that series doesn't even have complete scripts for the episodes. Instead, they have an outline of a scene, and the characters, the actors in the scene, know in general what has to be accomplished, and they improvise their way until that happens, until the things that need to be said are said. So, the Verite mode is suited to improvisation because you're shooting all the time. You get all that material. Another component of it is that it has a distinctive look. And this has become common, and maybe it doesn't have quite the effect that it once did, but the fact that it looks similar to documentaries means to us as viewers, it can seem less fake than like a multi-camera sitcom that's got a laugh track and so on. There are downsides to this mode, though. It makes editing difficult, like I said, because it generates so much content, so much that you have to go through. Curb Your Enthusiasm is expensive to produce because they have to spend so much time editing it. It also can be visually distracting. When an entire film or TV episode even is handheld camera, it becomes tiresome and overdone. So those are some potential upsides and downsides of all of these modes, actually, the single, the multi-camera, and then also the Verite mode.